Should we start now, Bhavani?
Saraswati,
Yeah,
you're on
okay.
set.
If all the panelists are ready, I would like
Yeah.
to start the program already. We are slightly delayed. Very good evening to everyone. I'm Saraswati, Secretary General of the Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all for this important, interesting topic discussion. We have three eminent speakers here, panelists here, and an all the more efficient moderator here. So I'm not going to read their impressive profiles. I leave that pleasant job to my colleague Madhumati. Just to give a brief introduction, the chamber is a 186-year young chamber, and we started this Women Business Council under the aegis of which the current program is happening just 10 months back, if I can be very precise, March 2021, and we started it as a part of our International Day celebration. But that doesn't mean that till this year, a 186-year-old chamber never did anything for the women or the gender inclusiveness. We have been doing a number of work, and in fact, this Women Business Council was launched by our first woman president, Ms. Mallika Srinivasan herself. And some of the things which I can just quickly mention is the Women Director Forum, which we started. We were the first chamber to do that when the government procedures, the company law board said there have to be women members in the board, independent directors in the board. When we looked around, we felt bad that we couldn't find many. Again, with people like Ms. Bhavani, the company law committee, we organized a very interesting workshop, and the idea was to develop women, board-ready women, if I can say. And we also had another very interesting program called She Leads, understanding or grooming leaders, women leaders, especially at an young age, catch them young between say 18 and 25. And this we did along with the British Deputy High Commissioner, and it was a 6 months program. Pan India, we called for entries. It was a long process, 6 months, and we identified 15 probably the potential leaders and gave intensive training. These are just a few things to mention. This particular program have been probably coined after a long deliberation, because we all know whether we like it or not, we have to accept. I'm confident Mr. Kannan also would definitely agree. He's a minority in this group, at least for a change. Otherwise, it used to be the other way always. We have to, though a lot of things, a lot of developments have happened for women, and we are changing many changes. Still, it is not the place where we want to land finally. It is still a long way to go. And we always feel for the same goal, every woman has to run few extra miles, not just one. That is the kind of situation. That could be because of many reasons. And in fact, I was just going through the women gender index and shocked, because we have been tracking it. I didn't see the figures last year, and it was all the more shocking. We have slipped down. I thought there would be a marginal improvement. But unfortunately, the World Economic Forum says we have slipped around 28, not just 1 or 2 points. Even if you don't want to totally accept it, definitely that's not a good sign. I saw that many points have contributed to that kind of a slip. The women labor force participation rate, which I believe is just 22.3%, was slightly better earlier. The share of women in professional technical thing, which shows the empowerment of women in a way, has again gone down to 29.2. And again, the topic we are discussing, like, the share of women in senior managerial position is just 14.6% of these positions are held by women, and hardly 8.9 firms have top women, female top managers. So definitely, I don't think we are happy about it. In fact, the Women Business Council, one of the things is to, we are looking at it two ways, the women acceleration, gender acceleration. One, for enabling career progression in women so that there are more women coming to the top, and the other side, more women entering into business and getting economically empowered. So we already started with our Coffee Connect series and the panel discussions like this. We have had a few already on very interesting topics. So this is yet another topic we are talking about, because when we talk about why women empowerment rate or the gender index is so low, one of the things is definitely the bias. Some could be conscious bias, which in any case consciously has to be fought against. And there are some unconscious bias. We probably give a stereotyped roles to women and say these are the things and all. And this definitely creates a glass ceiling. Maybe it would have been slightly pushed up Mr. Kannan has to say, but it still exists. That's the reality, at least as I could see. So that is the reason we are here. So as I said at the beginning, we are going to have an interesting discussion, and I would request my colleague Madhu to introduce the panelists. Then we will leave the screen, if not the floor, to Ms. Bhavani. She would drive through the thing, and the final word would be given by Ms. Madhuri, the co-chair of the committee. Ms. Bhavani is the chairperson of our Women Business Council. And to the participants, welcome you all. Thanks for joining. I thought I'll wait till it touches 100. It's almost touched 100 participants. So we'll start it without further ado. And I would request all of you, as you know, this topic is such an interesting topic, and I am sure even before listening to the speakers, you may have some doubts in mind. Keep posting it in the Q&A box, and as much as the time helps at the end, we would like to take up. I would stop here, extend a very, very warm welcome to all the panelists here, and I leave the floor to Madhu. Madhu.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Madhu. I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Chamber. I have pleasure in introducing today's moderator and panelists. For a change, as ma'am said, I would like to introduce first the men, or rather the gentlemen in this panel. Mr. Kannan Harikaran, he is the Chief Strategist, Culture and Belongingness of that. He was Senior Director HR in PepsiCo International for over 21 years, including 8 years in Vietnam and PVC. Prior to PepsiCo, he has 12 years experience working in manufacturing service in Indian industry. Mr. Kannan is the recipient of the PepsiCo Harvey C. Russell Diversity and Inclusion Award in 2004 and 2014, Chairman's Award for Corporate Social Responsibility in 2006, and Chairman's Award for Business Performance in Vietnam in 2014. He's conducted diversity, inclusion, and belongingness interventions for over 30 MNC and large Indian organizations from various industry verticals as part of the Avatar team. He has a bachelor's degree in English from Madras Christian College and associate degree in personnel management from the Madras School of Social Work. He studied advanced HRM at Michigan University Ross Business School. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Kannan.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Madhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Then we have, I will introduce all the panelists and the moderator, and then I'll pass it on to Ms. Bhavani. We have Ms. Charushri, IAS. She's a commissioner to Thoothukudi Corporation. She obtained the All India Rank 6 in Civil Services Examination 2014, All India Rank 14 in Forest Services Examination 2013, and was selected for Indian Revenue Service, Customs and Central Excise in 2014. She underwent IAS training in Missouri and was awarded gold medal for outstanding probation and IAS training. She's held several positions in the government from the year 2016 till date. She's completed a BE in College of Engineering, Guindy, and was a gold medalist. And her achievements started right in school when she became the district topper in class 10 and 12 exams. Thank you, Ms. Charushri, for being with us today, in spite of your busy schedules. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Then we have Ms. Gayatri Swaminathan, Director of the Ford Credit's Global Business Center panelist. Her current role is overseeing teams in Chennai and Coimbatore, India, that support Ford's credit business operations in North America and Europe. She's a chartered accountant. She started her career in 2000 at Ford Global Business Services as an accounting analyst for Ford India. She held a variety of accounting roles before joining Ford Credit. Gayatri strongly believes in put people first. Gayatri is the executive sponsor of Women of Ford India chapter and Globe Ford's Employee Resource Group for LGBTQIA+ for Ford in India. Thanks for joining us, Ms. Gayatri.
Thank you, Madhu. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you. Then we have the moderator, Ms. Bhavani Balasubramanian, Chairperson of the Women Business Council. She's a chartered accountant and corporate company secretary by profession and inclusion leader by a position at Deloitte. She's currently Chief Strategist, Diversity Evaluation of that. Throughout her career journey of over 4 decades as a woman leader, she has mentored women in finance to assume greater roles at the workplace, work towards developing allies who believe in the benefits of proportionate representation of women in leadership positions. She's been a member of the Asia Pacific Inclusion Council as India's representative for Deloitte India. Thank you, madam, for guiding the Women Business Council. That's the profile in brief of all the experts here. I now request Ms. Bhavani to take over the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhu, for introducing my panelists, the illustrious panel here. And I thank Saraswati for setting the tone for our topic today. And it was wonderful to look at the statistics and the gender proportions. And befittingly, we have chosen this topic today, which is in line with the IWD theme when we when we conceived this topic a few weeks ago, this was not even at that time, even the theme was not announced, and we were very happy that this seems to be the theme and focus during the current year. The IWD theme encourages us to visualize and propagate a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. A world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. A world where differences are valued and celebrated. Samuel Johnson said, "Bias and impartiality is in the eyes of the beholder." In today's discussion, we propose to unpack biases by discussing ways in which we can break the gendered bias and manage the unconscious bias at our workplaces. Unconscious bias occurs when one makes spontaneous judgments about people and situation based on past experiences, cultural background, and exposure to media. Scientists believe that in the non-conscious stage, the brain processes 2 lakh times faster than the conscious mind the sets of information. And unconscious bias, including implicit bias as the name suggests, are based on an array of factors which play out in different forms in the workplace. Biases manifest in different strands of diversity, not gender alone. It could be in every strand of diversity and also in the intersectionality space. But being the Women's Business Council, since bias is a vast area to explore, we decided to focus on managing unconscious bias, which impacts the largest strand of diversity, which is gender. Discrimination for gender is often defined as when personal decisions are made based on gender and ascribed characteristics rather than on individual qualifications or job performance. Angelina Fuentes said, "Gender parity is not good only for women, but it is good for the society as a whole." And we have an illustrious panel here to discuss on managing the unconscious bias in relation to gender. And I'm thankful to Kannan, to Charushree, and to Gayatri for joining us in this panel today. And we are very passionate. As Saraswati said, Saraswati is passionate about our business council, and our general committee and other members encouraged us to have this topic discussed as a curtain riser to the Women's Day celebrations. So having said this, let us discuss with the panelists about the fact that unconscious bias has been ever changing and has been acquiring various definitions in different scenarios. It is not what it was some years ago. So panelists, how do you view this? And what, according to you all, is gender bias in the current context? So feel free to speak, please. Gayatri, would you like to start?
Sure enough, ma'am. Thank you for having me here, and it's definitely a very, very interesting and evolving topic. And as you spelt out the question, what was the first thought that was, probably going through my mind is how does anybody even define, unconscious bias? Because a lot of times we have actually even stereotyped unconscious bias. I think we have stereotyped unconscious bias by saying it's something bad or something that that should very negative connotation to it. But in my mind, I think the first level of the way I view unconscious bias is actually acceptance that it is very intrinsic to each and every one of us. There is no human being, I would definitely say, that is absolutely bias free. All of us have biases. The biases manifest in us, as you rightly pointed out, throughout our life. I mean, whether it is, our upbringing, our societal influences, parental influences, social media influences for the current generation. I think it manifests us in each of us in so many different ways that it's actually a little hard to say that this is what bias is all about. The way I would, actually view it is it's about our sense of awareness as individuals. how open are we to different opinions, different points of view that exist in the ecosystem, and irrespective of where the person comes from or who the person is. So that's the way I view, and particularly if you look at gender diversity, I think it's the same thing, whether, irrespective of the identity of the person, how do I view the point that is coming across? That is my mind as being free of bias.
Wonderful. Kannan, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Bhavani, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I don't see this as being a minority in the group. I see myself as a panelist, and I see myself as honored to be part of a very strong panelist and people who have credible experience with them. So I'm really honored and excited to be part of this conversation. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. To me, bias, let me expand that a little bit more. I remember when I was a kid, my dad refused my interest in learning Bharatanatyam. He said that's not for boys, that's for girls. And I didn't learn Bharatanatyam and life moved on, right? So that was one way of his telling me what I should do and what I should not do. Similarly, when I got married and my wife was narrating various her life experiences, she told me how she did not face her father for several weeks because she had, as a young girl, she had chopped off her hair. Like those days, it was called, I believe, the sadhana cut or something like that. For the first time, she did something like that. And then she couldn't face her dad because she was afraid, because in the family they believed, and she was the first one to trim her hair, and they said that women should not trim their hair. That is how it has started. And to me, something like bias starts at home, in your personal life, right? This is not something that you can come to work or in the place of work that you can switch on and then you can say that, okay, I'm biased or I'm not biased, right? So therefore, this is very, very deep rooted. And I wouldn't blame anybody for being biased, because like Gayatri mentioned, actually there is sometimes to be biased is also okay. But what is important is that we need to become aware that we may be biased, and our decision, because that we may be biased, our decision could be impaired, right? We may not be taking the right decision because of the bias that we have. And that's because our brain tends to fall back on the bias that we carry all the time, right? And therefore, what happens is we may exclude somebody. And this is where I think gender bias comes in very well. And we are talking about man, women, the gender binary in that sense. So to me, gender bias has come a long way from the way we have been treated in the family to the way we are looking at going to jobs, who should go to work, when should women go to work, when should women not go to work, right? What is the right time? How should they prioritize their career versus family responsibilities? So all of that, bias manifests in all of this decision making, and not to mention in the way women progress in their career at the workplace. It manifests there as well. So these are some of my early thoughts. I'm sure as we go along, we'll get to discuss more about how it manifests in the workplace. Thank you, Bhavan.
Bhavani, you are not heard.
Muted.
Sarushree, we'd like to understand your perspective on gender bias and what is bias all about.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a pleasure being here as part of this panel. So, as Kannan sir had said, the bias starts from home. Just like charity begins at home, it starts at home. So, like he had an experience of not learning Bharatanatyam, I also, when he told the point, recollected that I was not allowed to learn skating because they felt that it was not a girl's sport. So there's biases inherent everywhere. And my first exposure to bias when I stepped into the public sector, especially the government spaces, was when they coined a term. That was the first time I heard it, when they said "Madam Sir." So they are so ingrained to a person, to a male being in the hierarchy or in the leadership position, and it "Sir" has become a very stereotype word for them, that they could not just stop with "Madam," but it became a "Madam Sir." So the first time you hear the word "Madam Sir," it takes you a little off the mark. like, what am I hearing for the first time? So that is how ingrained the concept that only a man or a gentleman can occupy a position of leadership, that is ingrained in the government spaces. So to see a woman, to see a lady, or to see a girl sitting there, it throws them also slightly off their balance, and they come. I think they came up with this term of "Madam Sir." So that is how the gender bias is, from my point of view, in the government spaces.
Very true. Very true. Thank you so much. The thoughts about gender bias being intrinsic, being deep rooted, the need for awareness, and the fact that it was very different for a woman to be at a place like what Charushree said. Charu, let me give you my perspective. After 33 years of service, I was delighted to see a woman in the boardroom. To that extent, when there was a woman director, by reflex, I first greeted her when compared to all the other men who were there, because it was like seeing your own, your own clan. So that's how the gender bias manifested in each one's life as an experience. Wonderful. So, Gayatri, we just want to look at and analyze biases at the workplace, and the fact that there is this affinity bias, confirmation bias, halo horn bias, status quo, mini me, the performance, the double discrimination, likability, and maternal biases. You can just go on listing them. But what are the common type of biases you see at the workplace, especially in the corporate sector, and that too related to gender bias? We'd like to get your views and what you see around.
Okay, so ma'am, I think you listed out so many biases that it definitely is, it's sort of a message that this is so evolving, right? Like, going back to the first question, we talk about how does it change? It changes so much. We understand so much and so deep, deeper and deeper. So I think, the way it manifests at workplace is, in my mind, I would say that there is a lot of uh, direct and very subtle, what we call as micro aggressions, or in my terminology, I would call it as micro messages, because micro aggression actually gives a lot of intent and conscious action being taken, but micro messages is sort of the subtle ways in which biases actually permeate the workplace. I mean, conversations that people, I mean, though it has evolved and there is a level of awareness around how and what to offer as support, I think still there are questions women face, saying, you're in night shift, will you be able to manage this type of work in night shift? What are your plans going forward, particularly if you're young in career, or how will you manage when you're talking about a promotion, or how will you manage your home and workspace? I think these sort of questions do permeate every now and then. But more than these questions, I think, the real challenge is when this happens in a very, very subtle fashion. Like, for example, there may be verbal cues. I mean, stepping aside of gender, I'm sure that, a lot of us would have worked with people from across different countries and continents. And often we have faced the question of, oh, people do speak good English in India. So that is a bias, right? So it's sort of a verbal cue, and that happens. It's happened to me when I've met, people from outside India as well. And there is also behavior related subtle messages that happen. For example, assuming that somebody from the female gender would not participate in an after work party. You're just assuming, and you don't extend the offer to them, right? That itself is a very subtle, you sort of behavioral ingrained, way you're saying that, no, this person will not join. Or even the environment. And I'm reminded of, this oft quoted story by Ma'am Sudha Murthy, where she actually speaks about her experience of being the first woman in engineering student, and there wasn't even a women's toilet when she actually went into workplace. So environment, that's just an example. Times have evolved, we've moved on, but it's still, there are spaces where we have these type of subtle micro messages or subtle biases manifesting in a lot of workspace related actions. And if you really reflect back on this, going back to our first question and interaction, I think it comes because of our experiences at home and the society, our beliefs out of it. I know we spoke about not being allowed to play skating or not being allowed to learn Bharatanatyam, but if you really broaden it a little bit, it's about what the society would think. So the society has certain beliefs which are leading to certain actions from us. So I think that's how it sort of permeates and manifests in different behaviors, ma'am.
So it was wonderful, Gayatri, to listen to the subtle thoughts which you gave on how bias manifests at the workplace. Deloitte had a research on women at work, a global outlook in which there were India findings, which is very interesting. It's a recent research which was published less than a year ago. And it said that Indian women experienced more non-inclusive behaviors than global women. That is 69% of Indian women experienced non-inclusive behaviors as compared to only 58% globally. What they also went on to say is being addressed in an unprofessional or disrespectful way was 21% in the Indian scenario as compared to 10% in the global scenario. And judgments of Indian women, 17% was the rate of questioning, whereas globally it was only 10%. And colleagues were commenting upon women who made presentations and women who gave proposals, and that was 17% when compared to the globe, when that was only 8% across. And being belittled by senior colleagues was 15% more in India as compared to the global percentage of 8. This just shows that we are improving, but there is a long gap when we compare ourselves to the rest of the world. So this is something which would add on to your thoughts of the subtle ways and the automatic exclusion of women in certain instances because of such either patriarchal judgments or assumptions which they make. So this is quite natural that you have covered what is there in the workplace. We will examine this a little more in relation to the life cycle of employment a little later. But we'd like to hear from Charushree Madam on how does she look at biases in the public sector. If we have lost her in terms of connectivity, then we'd move on with examining certain biases in the entire life cycle of human resources in the organization. Yes, Kannan?
Yeah, Bhavani, I think just to add to what Gayatri mentioned, I think beyond some of the biases that actually are visible or we see, but we don't take any action and all that, the microaggression that she talked about is much more toxic and it's much more difficult to identify because many times it gets couched under the intent and then the impact is not at all seen, right? So I think it's important for organizations to be mindful of some of these small aspects, small microaggression aspects, which if you don't address it immediately, can even go to the extent of biases in various forms, building on upon that, and then lead to what you today call as posh and sexual harassment and so on and so forth. So I think microaggression is something that we cannot ignore in organizations. It needs to be nipped in the bud, and that's what I wanted to add.
True. Yeah, thanks, Kannan. Yes, Charushree Madam, we'd like to hear your thoughts about how bias is prevalent in the public sector and what you have seen in your experience.
Ma'am, as I had put forth, so at leadership positions, they don't expect women to hold a leadership position. So seeing a woman itself is something new for them. So in my personal experience, apart from this, Madam Sir, so if I happen to go around in my official vehicle to some function and my husband is accompanying me, by default, it is assumed that my husband is the officer. No offense to him, but still it is assumed that my husband is the officer. So that is how people treat. So the first instinct anywhere that when we both of us get down from the car, it is by default assumed that he would be the officer and I would be the spouse accompanying. So that is how ingrained the bias is there in our system. And in government spaces, it is, I feel it is even more ingrained that they have been traditionally seeing only men occupy the position. So they are not open to the idea of a female stepping out of the car as an officer. It's gradually changing. They are getting used to the idea because I kind of put my foot down and say that, no, I am the person you're supposed to be calling forth. So that is how ingrained it is. And also it's assumed that women are not open to take up a tough responsibility or a field task. They feel that women are better suited for 10 to 6 kind of a job. They will not want to stay late, or they'll not want to venture into the field more. So that is there. So when a women officer gets officer, or even a second level officer gets posted, so the first reaction that comes from the others is that I don't want her in my team, because she would not stay back after 6. She'll not be open to the idea of going to the field, because we are in public spaces. There's a lot of public grievances that come to us there, which we'll have to attend. So a lot of interaction happens. So they feel that they are not up for it. So that is by default given. And then because right from the start, a person is denied that opportunity of handling a difficult situation, that spirals into their career, so on and so forth. So the day one, I am not able to manage a critical law and order problem. So as I, in the next stage of my life, I would automatically have a doubt if I would be able to do it. So from small, if I would have handled some smaller problems I had, this would have not, this thought would not come to me. So the bias in others is ingrained into me. In as a woman, it also ingrains into the person, that they also start feeling that, okay, maybe this is not my cup of tea. So the bias gets reciprocated also from the other side, because they are stereotyped and put into certain roles. Certain responsibilities are only given to them. It becomes both ways. I also start doubting my capabilities as such, as the women. I'm speaking for the women in the government sector. So we start doubting that if we are up for it, if we can take up a situation just like any other male counterpart would do. So this starts coming up. These thoughts start coming up.
Charushree, it's not only for women in public sector, even in the corporate sector, you find most of the time the line function roles are often, the business functions are given to the men, and women are very often made leaders only for the supporting systems. One is, it's not a job which is really in the P&L. So Avatar had done research on this. How many of women have got P&L responsibilities, and over the 5 years of Avatar's best of best companies, we have noticed that that has increased, but there is still a long way to go. So it is true for every sector. And in the lighter vein, whenever I used to get down in Mumbai or in Calcutta in the middle of the night, and I used to go looking for my car, the board used to say Mr. Bhavani Balasubramanian, and I had to convince the driver to say it is me. And they would look at me differently because they don't want to go wrong in not picking up a male member. So that is the kind of bias which prevails everywhere. It's very true, very true. And what Saraswati said in terms of the gender statistics and what you said, it is only 40% of the 2.8 lakh scientists who are women in India. And with the new historic judgment of the military, we are told that the military people are given frontline roles, but we really have to see it happen. Excepting what you see in the parades that sometimes women lead, we don't really know as to what roles they are really playing. And this is an area where we are changing, and we are quite happy that the public sector has got women directors in all its navaratnas. But you're right, it says there is a long way to go. Now, looking at the corporate and the public sector and understanding how bias manifests, we'd like to look at some insight in terms of how bias manifests during the entire HR life cycle. And who else can explain to us other than Kannan, who's a person who has got a diversity and inclusion award consistently in 2 times in a decade, and having been with HR. So Kannan, all yours to tell us about biases in a HR life cycle.
Thank you, Bhavani. This is something that you will see right from the start. It is right from the way you start looking at your job description, describing the job, starting the hiring process, through the career progression process, including pay parity, all of this, and even how you deal with resignations. It permeates all of these aspects, and there are sometimes they are very subtle, sometimes even more obvious, right? And let me give you some examples of where it starts. Like, for example, if you look at the entire gamut of the recruitment cycle, starting with job descriptions, right? We often hear managers talk about, no, we only want to hire meritocracy people. We don't differentiate between men and men. We want only merit. But imagine and see who is writing the job description, who is defining what is meritocracy, right? Invariably, the job descriptions, the language, there are gender associations, and language inherently has gender associations, right? So sometimes job descriptions has words like, we want very confident, decisive, strong, and some of these words are more associated with men than women. And mind you, data has proved that uh, men tend to apply for jobs where they even match about 70% of the job descriptions, whereas women expect that they should match the job descriptions 100%. So when they find some of these kind of job descriptions in the language that is being used, they don't even apply, right? So that's the first hurdle that happens, and that's the first the moment of truth that women go through. The other one is during the interview process, right? And this I've seen very often, and then the intent is very good. And many times the interviewer asks certain questions about the family, about how do we plan to have the family, expand the family, so on and so forth. And the women will be excited to answer. The girl who's sitting on the other side will be excited to answer about how she's excited to get married very soon, and then she wants to start a family in a year or two. Then when you come to the final selection, that's where I think they make a difference in terms of men versus women, and whom they would prefer to hire versus whom they would stereotype and say that, okay, if we hire this person, maybe there won't be any stability, the person may drop out because of marriage, so on and so forth, right? So that happens a lot during the interview process, and therefore it's important that the hiring managers understand and become aware of these biases, right? As you go along in the life cycle of the employee, you will find that this is also manifesting in the way professional development, career advancements are happening. Many times I've seen in sales organizations also, uh, not with the intent of causing any harm or damage to the women employees. Most of the leads, sales leads, are given to men. And the assumption is that women will not be able to match up to the requirements of the sales lead. So that itself, the women tend to lose out on, even if there are women in sales, they tend to lose out on the sales, right? And when it comes to career advancement opportunities, the best example that I can talk about is the story around, PepsiCo CEO, former CEO Indra Nooyi herself. She was, when Roger Enrico was the chairman of the organization, and then he knew that he was retiring and he had taken on Peter Thompson to succeed him. They knew that Peter Thompson had not more than 3 years to go, and therefore they needed a pipeline of leader readily available. So they wanted a vice chairman or something like that to be also hired. So that's when Peter Thompson and Roger Enrico approached Indra Nooyi. She herself refused that job. She said, I don't think I'm ready yet. But it was a faith and the confidence that Peter Thompson and Roger Enrico showed on Indra Nooyi. The rest is history, right? So if you don't have male allies, like I talked about, and there are so many of them within the organization, women do face some of these career advancement hurdles. I don't think this person can manage multiple locations because it will involve travel, and I don't think she will be comfortable traveling. Oh, she's just had the second baby. I think her hands are full, right? Let her give us 1 more year to go before we can, bounce off this new job to her. These kind of comments keep coming very often than not, and therefore professional advancement and career advancement are affected because of the bias, right? And like I mentioned about the child care and all those things, parental status, even between women, There is a tendency to prefer women who are not married and who don't have children versus women who are married and who are having children. Therefore, there is a multiple challenge of intersectionality of diversity that the women will have to manage. So there are multiple things that come in the way in terms of these biases manifesting, right? If you also look at mentorship, when you want to grow in the organization, right? There again, bias happens, right? While 67% of the women view mentorship is very important for them in terms of their career advancement, actually only 10% of the women opt out to be mentored. They themselves believe that, oh, if I take up this mentoring program, I may have to move into bigger level jobs. So that is so much ingrained in their mind that bias comes in. And last but not the least, I want to talk about compensation and rewards, how it, the bias reflects here. Gender, I mean, it's surprising to note, and many people don't even know this. Gender pay gap range from anywhere between 3% to 51%, and on average, it sits at somewhere around 17%. Right? So there is a serious situation here that we need to be aware of and start taking affirmative action in each of these life cycle touch points of the employees. If we don't do corrective action at all of these aspects, and this is where I think aspects like sexual harassment and how genders are differently treated when even at the time of sexual harassment, all of these aspects manifest in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Kannan. As you spoke, I'm able to reflect on what I went through because I was a change agent and the first woman to do a lot of things in my organization and therefore very unpopular. So the first thing is, as a learning leader, when we had to go and train the Pakistan office, I said, I'm going. And I had to face a lot of music from all my leaders. And they said, no, send the men. Why do you want to go? I said, no, it's my responsibility. Let me go. And it was a fight. And I had to really prove that it would be successful. And I know they were all tensed about it, which is true, genuinely so. And every time when I had to ask for something in terms of opportunities, there was always this care as to whether we will be able to do it, whether a woman will be able to manage. And they would like to give you only safe things to handle. And it was today the generations have changed. There are more women handling things, but it has been difficult to bring the change through. So it's very nice that you spoke about these aspects in the life cycle and about the language, the inclusive language. I'm reminded of the fact that Avatar during its best companies this year had published a book. Dr. Nandini had written a handbook on language, inclusive language.
That's right.
That would be something useful, and maybe I should ask. I'll pass it on to the chamber to share it with people. As we speak, it strikes me. And that would help a lot in terms of what kind of language which people should use in corporates. So this is something which is very important. And talking about corporates, 33% of the best of companies in this best of best companies said they don't have any bias filters, whereas 70% of the companies had the bias filters on female talent, which just shows that this is something which is being looked at by corporates. So wonderful, Kannan. Thanks so much for your insights on the life cycle. But when we look at inclusive language, which you said, and this is something which, if not taken care, results in a lot of exclusion. And Gayatri spoke about microaggressions. So how does one identify and unlearn the biases which are so subtle? And how can organizations outsmart it? And what kind of learning should we impart in organizations on trying to manage the unconscious bias? Because this is a puzzle. Everybody says, yes, unconscious bias is there, but what should we do in terms of the first steps in learning? Your thoughts?
Yeah. Honestly speaking, I think it starts with building awareness. There is a lot of conversation today happening at the corporate level, at the organization level, at the industry level, even at the government level, in terms of how we become more and more aware of this unconscious bias and how it impacts the various aspects of the work and workforce participation of women. And the surprising aspect is whenever there is a calamity, whether it is demonetization. The other day I was listening to an economist talking about how almost 4.5% drop happened in the workforce participation of women when demonetization happened. Take COVID, for example, 3.7% drop in women workforce participation, right? So whenever there is a calamity, it's women workforce participation is hugely impacted for various reasons. There is a cultural aspect, there is a societal aspect, there is an organizational aspect, and also individuals, the way they look at it. Therefore, it is important for organizations to become aware. That's the first step, right? And we all know when there is bias, if a workplace is infested with bias or not, we know that. There are corridor conversations, there are team meetings, right? You know how who is speaking, who is not allowed to speak. How do you involve a diverse set of people in the meetings? I remember at one point in time in PepsiCo, we used to mandate that every teams that are being formed should have a diverse set of people in the teams, whether it is generational diversity or whether it is gender diversity, right? So these kind of aspects need to be kept in mind. More importantly, I think at this, any systemic issue, this is a systemic issue. Any systemic issue requires addressing it from a systemic point of view, right? And it's important in that sense to identify where are the gender bias in your recruitment process, for example, right? Where can we change the language appropriately? So that's one area where we must be watchful about. More importantly, and especially this is for the HR folks who are on this, participants here, and all the HR folks, we haven't leveraged data adequately. There is a lot of data point available, whether it is resume selection, whether it is response to your advertisement, whether it is the rating points that are being allocated over the years. Everywhere, I think we can use leverage data very well. I was speaking to an organization leadership team today, this morning only, and the HR leader was talking to me about how they are leveraging LinkedIn data to understand what kind of language and for what kind of language, how the response between men and women candidates differ. So leveraging data points is very important, and that's the only way you can outsmart some of these biases. So to sum it all, there are two ways of addressing it. One is to become aware and educate yourself to understand the various aspects of bias and how it comes in. Two, build systemic action, build more affirmative action in the processes, in the systems that you evolve. Look at data, some of these things. So if you do these two things, I think that is a good way to start outsmarting bias.
Thanks, Kannan. As you were saying, I was reminded of one step which Microsoft had taken during the pandemic to collect the live data, the on-screen data in the meetings, and produce a report to the managers once in 15 days to say how the airtime has been used by the participants and who are the participants who have not had any airtime, so that the leader is aware that they should give a chance for the others, for those people to speak. So it is really something, as you said, leveraging the data is most important, and addressing systemic issues. It's wonderful to think about these two in addition to an unconscious bias training. Today, there are a lot of opportunities to have a formal training on this, including e-learning modules, and I'm sure organizations would incorporate this as one of the key aspects of the HR and personal development curriculum. So, having looked at these things, panelists, what is the changing landscape in managing biases today? And how are people responding to this? And what are some of the best practices? So, would we like to start with Gayatri, please, on the corporate sector?
Sure, ma'am. So just to bring some thoughts around, how I can speak from being part of Ford and how we are looking at it, or how as an individual I'm seeing other companies handle this, and also to build on a little from what Mr. Kannan alluded to. I think what I am seeing is organizations are increasingly becoming aware of where they stand on the on the DEI continuum, I would say. So I think there is there is a lot of emphasis within the organization, and from, as part of doing good business, also to see where we stand on the DEI continuum. So it is, while it is for the people involved, I think as a responsible corporate organization, I think a lot of like, for example, I think we've gone through, and I'm sure many other companies over the last few years have been going through what we are calling as DEI audits. So these are, self-evaluations, and like human beings, I think it's also very difficult for the corporate sector to look at itself and say these are things that are not going well in your area, right? So I think that, I believe, is a very important trend. And going by our experience and having been part of different DI audit discussions at Ford, I think even having been in the organization, a lot of us for several years, what we learned out of this DEI audit is something that we would have never found out unless we did an introspection. So I think that is very powerful, right? And it sort of is a bias, is an unlearning exercise in itself, because you are, having been part of an organization, you accept certain things, saying this is how it is, the picture is very good, but then you go back and say, no, the picture is slightly dainted in certain areas. So I think that is something that I am seeing as a, sort of a trend, or emphasis that is coming through in a lot of different places at our organization. And I think the other good thing that is happening, that I see, and we can debate whether it is good, not so good, but different organizations have been approaching it in different ways, is the power of employee resource groups. The fact that you have employee resource groups for different aspects of diversity. I mean, and it could be different for multinational companies versus different for, companies based in India. So you could have racial, ethnic groups based on ethnicity, groups based on gender identity, groups based on, differently abled. But the fact is that there is a lot of emphasis that I am seeing on, on these initiatives, taking concrete steps towards strengthening these employee resource groups, paying attention to what is the outcome from these employee resource groups, and taking action out of that. I think that is another area that I am seeing a lot of emphasis on, and tying it all, going back to what Mr. Kannan spoke. I think tying it all with data, because one of the things that we don't do, and we are a little hesitant to do also, is measuring ourselves on how we are doing on this, because once we look at data, we are also sensitive to the fact that it can actually cause a little bit of an earthquake here and there, right? So we are, we do play it safe at points of time, but I think the conversations that I'm seeing are really trending towards that. And last but not the least, I think if you really need to make change, one of the things that that we do very well in corporate environments is look at write down in our yearly objectives that this is what we are going to be doing for this year, and this is how we will measure ourselves. So I think that's also something that I'm seeing in a lot of organizations. We are putting it down in objectives, measuring it, and delivering on it. I think these are concrete steps that we can take, whether not only on gender diversity, but that there are a lot of organizations are taking as well. So I think yeah, that's what I wanted to share from an
Great.
corporate space.
Yeah, as you were explaining, I was just relating it to some of the experience with professional services firms and corporates. What happened 2 years ago, the World Economic Forum stressed on gender equality, especially when the IMD had the, build a gender equal world. So people, CEOs took it up on themselves in global MNCs to say that they will reach 50-50 by 2022, 2023, and so on. And the kind of propelling effect it had on all the HR processes, I was a true witness to it. When we had partner admissions of women, or director level, which is next to partner, it used to be the few of these outstanding women who had to appear for these panel committee meetings presentations, and they were selected more because these people have proved their history, and they used to be few in number. When this global objective was set and it percolated down to every member firm to show the performance, I have seen the number of hours our senior committees have spent in looking at why not look at these women and to look at those women who were rejected for promotions or rejected for partnership. More time was spent on those rejections instead of affirming the one or two who automatically qualified and who were even delayed and denied promotions in the past. So because there was a global target set and there was a focus on that, it started percolating down to every division and it was part of KRA. How many women are you having in your project teams? And then we went on in terms of data in Deloitte to look at how many women are on the pink roles and in the blue roles in important projects.
Mm.
And that is the kind of split we had on data and on all aspects of promotions at every level and the tenuring. We looked at the tenuring when compared to men and women, how long have they been in tenures? And as Kannan said, finally the compensation. So as you said, data is so important. In terms of DEI audits, it is automatic for MNCs who are aware to have DEI audits. But what we keep encouraging people is to do a diagnostic. It could be a mid-level organization. It could be a homegrown organization. It could be a small organization. What we encourage is do a diagnostic to see where you stand on the curve and set those recommendations for yourself so that you could be ready for a full-fledged audit in 3 or 4 years. It's not going to happen immediately. And audit is a wrong word, but I would say a diagnostic is more encouraging for people to set what should be the action points. This has been at least my experience. And let's hear from Charushree madam on what are the trends she is seeing in the public sector, and she interacts so much with the government. So we'd like to hear from you because that's a very special perspective, madam.
With respect to the government sector, so as Gayatri ma'am had been pointing out, for the private sector, there's more systematic changes that is happening. So that is not the case. I would be more happy if it was, but that is not the case. It's very sporadic. So if there's a woman on the top, so she will start advocating for women down below her. So there's not much of a systematic change that's happening. But recent days, the government is also thinking, okay, there is a need to have more women participation to enable, to provide an enabling environment for more women to step in. So recently they have come up with a draft TN policy for women in 2021. So it's still in the draft stage. They've not finally published it. So, but we are looking at providing a more enabling environment rather than just saying that you have to have 50%. Although there are some norms fixed for us, say in terms of local bodies, you have to have 50% reservation and all. But are they actually acting in their positions? That is a question that we will have to look at. So the reality doesn't say so. They are more of the face, and the brain behind it is someone else. So the government is trying to provide an enabling environment in terms of providing them avenues for training to make it more experience oriented, so they get an idea of what roles and responsibilities they have. So each individual government office is a unit in its own. So so in my office, I try to advocate for the women below. If someone wants to have a more field experience, so I'm pro it. So I see suddenly an officer comes to me at 9 o'clock in the night and says that, no, I don't want her. She will not stay late back. I will look at the time, I look at myself, and then I will start advocating. I am there till 9. Why can't she be? If she's willing to be, then she should be given a chance. I understand that there are circumstances when some may not be able to, given the family responsibilities. But I think that is a choice that a woman should make. I should be in a position to tell that I will be staying late or I'll go early.
Can't assume.
But that is a call that I should take and not someone else to take on my behalf. So this I am trying to advocate, and all the women officers also have a sense of it, and probably those spouses who have offices in services, they are also being pushed this idea that you are not supposed to discriminate against a lady officer in your office just because she's a lady and she'll not work late. So these are some ideas that are coming up. We are trying to advocate, but it's I still see it a long way to go. These are baby steps that we are taking, and a positive change is happening to an extent. And I'm sure the government will also step in a bigger way once things map down well for them also. So we are still at the baby steps stage, and we have a long way to go, and all these corporate experiences are insights for me, so that's something that I can do in the organizations as I move from one place to another. These are some steps that I would like to take in. Data is something that we really don't look at. It's a day-to-day work that we get done and be done with it. It's not something systematically, what is the data, what is the percentage of women here, how many are in the field, how many are in the office, is something that we don't analyze. But now, given what Kanan sir and Gayatri ma'am had pointed out, I think I would also want to have these kind of analytics done, so that we have a sense of where we are standing in terms of this bias. So we have a long way to go, but we are making inroads, I would say.
And we in the chamber would be too happy to work with y'all, entities like y'all, to see what kind of awareness we could build on these aspects, and see what kind of insights or simple training trips which can be useful for the government setup. I'm sure we'd be interested in doing something like this, Charu.
Yes, ma'am. We are open to
I'm giving this message on behalf of Saraswati, and I'm sure I can see her nodding for this objective, because it would be laudable to make the change in the government sector. And as you said, it is not that policies are implemented immediately everywhere in corporate sector. Many of these policies remain as plastic policies until they are checked with data and until it enters the KRA of people. It is a long journey, madam. So it is the story. It starts with policies and it stays there as policies, and we go on for years to make the change. So it happens. So thank you so much for your perspective. And Kannan, having heard the corporate sector thoughts and having heard what Charusri said, what according to you are some of the suggestions you'd like to offer for best practices or things which organizations can do? While you have spoken about some earlier, are there any additional thoughts?
Yeah, actually, building on the previous conversation that we had, I think some of the trends that are catching up and we need to be aware of, like as we are rushing into this diversity and inclusion agenda, and a lot of people are kind of putting their actions in place. One of the things that I see emerging is women are becoming wary of some of these initiatives. They are seeing this as just tick in the box. They are asking questions: why do we need to celebrate a Women's Day? Right? So therefore, it is important to involve the stakeholders in some of the actions that we are taking. And it's important to involve or engage with them deeply and understand what is it that they are looking forward to. I don't think they are looking for equal opportunity. I think they're looking for equitable opportunities within the organization. They're looking for support wherever they feel that as a woman building up a career, she's not able to succeed as much as a man can do it. Right? So these are some of the watch outs. These are some of the emerging trends. But I see a lot of awareness getting built up within the organization. Leaders are committing themselves to drive this agenda. There is a lot of leadership commitment. In my sense, I think some of the best practices that we can look at is to have a very clear talent strategy. I recollect when I was in Vietnam, we had some similar issues for some other reason. I had a 8-year talent strategy. And there the problem was about having more expats. So that was a different problem. But similarly, I think organization must articulate and very clearly articulate about what their talent strategy is. Is it going to be buy, build, or borrow? How is the gender diversity or any other form of diversity marrying with this talent strategy? Right? So if you want to increase your gender representation, how are you planning to do it over the next 3 years? It doesn't happen by tomorrow. One fine day you can't go out and hire 100 women. Yes, you may hire them, but they may not stay in the organization. So the diversity strategy and the talent strategy must tie up. That's one a good practice that I see coming along the way. The companies are looking into it. Like I talked about data analytics, very, very critical. Like this company that I talked about, they were looking at LinkedIn data for one of their job descriptions, job ads. and they were looking at how many men responded versus how many women responded. Okay, and then when they changed the language of the job description, they found that the women responded more than the men. Now, how many of us are going to do this kind of study? That's another very good practice. How many of us are looking at tracking our performance rating across the organization by geography, by business, by leader? How many, what is the trend? How many women are getting 3 on 5? How many are getting 2 on 5? How many are getting 4 on 5? Is there a trend? That's another thing that we need to very, very deeply examine and see, right? The third one, which many companies are doing as best practices, addressing at the society level, grassroots level. Saint Gobain is a very good example. Mondesil is a very good example, where they are going and working with the nearby communities to change their outlook about women coming to work. And Avatar also has a very, very wonderful program of Putri, where we are addressing women at a very grassroots level, at the government school level, and creating career intentionality in their mind. Programs like this, leveraging programs like Putri, will go a long way in terms of building the overall ecosystem to support a gender balanced workplace. I'm being very careful in what I'm saying. I'm talking about a gender balanced workplace, not one versus the other, right? That's from my end, Bhavani.
Yeah. If you look at the manufacturing sector, there's a recent interesting publication which GE Research has done. And Avatar is proud to have been associated with that survey. It has spelled out the initiatives which are required by government and policymakers to reassess and redesign policies for women, which I'm happy that the Tamil Nadu government has come out with a draft, and conduct diversity drives and have social awareness campaigns. For organizations, they have called out that affirmative action, like what our panelists spoke, promoting allyship, we discussed about this, building inclusive behaviors, we spoke about the language, and enabling better work-life balance are some of the initiatives which this research paper has brought about. So, having discussed so much on how to manage unconscious bias, we have touched upon the need for diversity and inclusion, which is not a priority because it is something nice to have, but it is a must to have if we are to fulfill our mission to manage the unconscious bias. We must all acknowledge unconscious bias, listen with less bias when women and others are marginalized, they speak out, and a lot of change is possible by acknowledging the unconscious bias, as our panelists said, and exhaustively documenting the unpleasant reality and not ignore something, as Tara Moss said. It is always, it is true, it is human to be biased, but to do something about it is more so, as Sonali De Silva put it. So this being some of the thoughts which we had, I thought that I'm going to surprise my panelists with a rapid fire round. So I will ask a few questions and I'd like to have quick, brief answers. I'm not going to ask any panelist who's ready will be able to just respond to my question. Okay. The first one microaggression, wording or comment which strikes you.
Oh, you're having another baby.
Okay.
You sound young.
You sound young, yeah.
You're so young, not you sound young. You're so young for what you're for your position you're holding. So
okay. Thank you so much. Those were really wonderful ones. And what is the nullifying counter for this sentence? I mean, once this comes out, what would be a nullifying befitting response for this? Any other comment which you can think of? Because this is something straight from the heart, right? So take your time, no problem.
A befitting reply, from my point of view, I think should be something like, it's none of your business. It can be on the face,
yeah.
but I think you say that once, the next time the person will not ask the same question.
So, Kannan, I'm reminded of a fact that both of us were employed abroad and then we came back and went back to our same organizations. It was just for 3 years. And every time when the increments were there and the promotions were there, people who are familiar with me right from childhood, all of them, the comment they used to make is, both of you have earned abroad. So both of you have got. I said, for how many years are you going to say this? It was just 3 years. Do you know what I earned and what we lost? So why are you repeating this every time? I mean, how many years do you want me to listen to this? So this bias is always there. So comments could be of any type. It could be even on remuneration.
I'd like to hear how the other panelists respond to this.
How would you nullify or give a counter comment for some microaggression which would come to you, or have you heard somebody facing a microaggression?
I have faced, but I have not responded the way Kannan sir, Mr. Kannan said. But I have taken a few days off, called the person later, and told them that this was not right. And never have I faced that again from the individual. So I think that's how I've handled it.
Great.
The comment of being so young. So when I stepped into services, I was 24. So this is something I used to hear. So the reply, you generally used to be lucky me. And I don't think they have a better counter to give for that. So that is how it has always been.
The next question. When you see gender bias, what is the one act which you want to immediately do to stop that? You know, something which really motivates you to say, hell, I will stop it. What is that?
What I have done in my workplace is to call the person aside and ask him whether he realized what he said or what he did. I'll post that question to that person and ask him to reflect on what he said or what he did. And then that triggers a lot of further conversation, and then, it takes on.
Yeah, great. So would the other panelists want to say something?
That's what I would have done as well.
Yeah.
I would have lectured him about it.
True. Very true. Okay. The one thing you noticed, which has been a revelation for the other gender, looking at how well women have performed during the pandemic. See, people have changed their views about working women during the pandemic. You hear it very often from men. So, what is the one thing you noticed?
I think there is a lot more shared responsibility.
Yes.
There is that awareness that we're doing the same work, same box, same computer, but the work is more on one side of the home. So I think that shared responsibility is something that I'm seeing not only at home, but generally everybody is, talking about it. My male colleagues, everyone. Yep.
Great. I also experienced the same thing. I saw many of my colleagues acknowledging the fact that we were all working in the office. They didn't realize we did so much at home and then came to work, and they even apologized for holding us up late for meetings. So that was a great revelation. Yeah. So what about Charu and Kannan? Any thoughts on that? The one thing that struck you, which is a big difference in people.
I say that the care that the children get goes up because of this, because now the father also feels that he has an equal responsibility to take care of the child, and when it comes to food also, they feel that okay, there's an additional responsibility. They are also supposed to step in and contribute in ways they could. So in both these aspects, I feel that men have become more aware that there is this arena also in which they can contribute and support the family.
Yeah, that's true.
Just to build on what Charu ma'am is talking about. I think they have mastered the art of getting work done by their spouses. They always knew how to do it, but they have now established that.
So we have some question from the participants, and so I would probably cut the rapid fire round and pose this question on. They would like to understand wrong DEI implementation or pitfalls which people should be aware of. Kannan, are there examples?
Oh yes, many.
You can give us.
Many. Focusing just on diversity, getting the numbers in place, and not as much on inclusion is the biggest pitfall. Number one. Number two, it's more seen as a HR agenda than as a leader's agenda. These two are the big pitfalls. Unless there is a leadership commitment and the right tone at the top, this will fall flat when the rubber hits the road.
So I hope Vijayaraghavan is happy with the answer. We have another question from Rahul Shivakumar. He says this has been an excellent session, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that biases which men are subject to are as well important. And what are our thoughts on that? Although this is a Women's Business Council, yes, we will take this question. Any of the panelists who want to answer this?
Of course, bias is all pervasive. When we talk about bias, of course, though this conversation is specific to gender bias, bias in general impacts all forms of gender, whether it is men, women, or anybody for that matter. So therefore, men could be affected. I have been affected because of affinity bias, for example. There used to be a time when PepsiCo wanted to hire only people from the Unilevers of the world, right? And I was not from there, right? So I was affected at one point in time because of that bias. So men also get affected because of the bias. So therefore, it is important for us to become aware of the fact that there can be bias, or we could be biased. And therefore, looking at what action I can take to mitigate the risk that can come out of that bias.
Wonderful, Kannan. To add to what you said, men have been subject to a lot of bias, especially in professional services, because of the safety and because of clients' hesitation to have women traveling and coming to their work spots, especially to the remote projects and other things. It was always the men, the boys, who were subject to this load of constant travel. And the women used to enjoy, work within the city and hardly to factories and other things when they had to come late. Or the men had to be the escort for these girls and get dropped last. It could be very ridiculous for somebody living across the city. This person had to go and he had to be the last person to get dropped. So despite the fact that we have improved, we have gone far ahead, the threat of safety in the environment makes this bias against men. And the more you have the lesser number of men and more women in the team, the load becomes a little more on the men. I've seen this happening. And whenever it comes to flexible working, people tend to forget that this flexibility is also applicable for men. The moment it is flexible working, it is associated with the women, which is very untrue. You should have the same flexibility for women as well. That's why many of the video clippings and advertisements which come focus on men being given importance for these aspects which they share, so that the message is subtly across that the bias should not be there. So wonderful. And there is one more question on what do you think, obviously incorrect stereotypes like that girls like pink remain in society. What are those stereotypes which still remain in society? This is a question, any panelist, it's not addressed.
Go ahead, Gayatri.
Sure. So I think no stereotype has gone away. I think no stereotype has gone away, will take a long time to go away, or probably will evolve into another stereotype. But I think the point here is to be aware of these stereotypes, is to be aware. And that starts, from home. And, just linking it up with the previous question on pitfalls, I think the other thing that we ourselves don't like is being stereotyped. Women don't like to be stereotyped, right? We don't like to be stereotyped as saying that our wants are only so much. So I think the stereotyping will remain, but I think we will need to, I don't think unconscious bias conversations are going to go away at all. It is going to be something that we will need to continue to have. It could be on gender today, it could be on something else tomorrow, it could be on another aspect of diversity or talent or something. So I think that's in my view, it has to evolve. We'll have to continuous education. Through continuous education, awareness, and building a very open mind as individuals. I think it starts with us at home, having an open mind, and that's where I would take it from.
There is one more very interesting question. With a wider use of social media, do you think the biases have come down or it has increased?
Awareness is there, has increased, but biases have not come down. If at all anything, I think biases are becoming stronger in certain quarters. And to be very honest, I don't think that's good also. So I think because people like to position themselves using social media, and it sometimes becomes very difficult as well. So awareness is there, but I don't think it's coming down at all. That's my view.
And it also depends upon how you're using social media as a
Yeah.
tool to support your decision making, or as a tool to short circuit some of these things, right? And yeah, social media can be harmful as well. It can put too much of stress on your cognitive resources.
Great. So we've discussed the various ways gender bias manifests in the workplace. We've also talked about increasing the awareness, having systemic issues addressed, having leaders' commitment, and making sure that we all are focused towards tackling and managing the unconscious bias. Before I hand over to my co-chair to do the pleasant task of thanking you all, I'd like to do one aspect, to take a pledge that we'll break the bias. And we are going to do that by crossing our hands like this. And I'd like all participants to do that, which is the symbol of the IMD, so that we set our curtain raiser for our Women's Day celebrations. Let's break the bias. Thank you.
Let's break the bias.
Thank you. So it's been a wonderful session, panelists. We've had a lot of interactions, and I'm sure our participants would have had quite a few things to take away. And before Madhuri starts her vote of thanks, is there anything you'd like to add, Saraswati?
No, nothing much. I think it's a pretty good session. So after Madhuri proposes her vote of thanks, only one request: please stay back. We will take a group photo. We would prefer to do it in person, given the current situation. I request the panelists to stay back and just take a group photo in whatever format is possible. Thank you. Madhuri, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure all of them will have the same factor that I'm having right now, that I'm going through. Questions like we have, like, do first impressions matter? Should we judge a book by its cover? Should we compare and contrast? How to get over the, the halo and horn effect? The halo effect is, I see somebody with a halo, I don't care about what are their, shortcomings are. Or if it's a horn effect, I don't care as to what are their, best qualities. Are we going to break this at the end of the session? I'm sure all of us are going to look at it from a different perspective itself and look at it. So on behalf of my chairperson, Ms. Bhavani, and other WBC members, it is my absolute pleasure, not a pressure, sorry, absolute pleasure to propose the vote of thanks after this scintillating session. We had some absolutely fantastic. I would include the chairperson also as a panelist because she done an excellent job. Ms. Charu Shri, it has always been a pleasure interacting with her and for sharing with us openly her experiences and some enlightening aspects in the public sector, and also for trying to promote diversity and breaking the glass ceiling there. We wish you the very best in the baby steps that you're actually taking in, and those directions which will take you to a long way, which is ahead of you. Mr. Kannan Hariharan, he has a very rich experience in the field, and he did complete justice on giving us that, sharing that rich experiences, interesting perspectives on the concept of non-conscious bias itself, and how to overcome it, and also have a gender balanced workspace. But sir, if it is not too late, you should try dancing. If not Bharatanatyam, some other form, because it is never too late. Ms. Gayatri Swaminathan, while sharing her experience on the subject, she gave us a very pointed direction to overcome, or to break the bias, which will be a heading to many corporates, not just for work, at work-related biases, even at home also, you can have a lot of takeaway from her experiences that she has shared. So special thanks to all the panelists who have agreed to participate in this discussion and share with us. I'm sure there's a lot of takeaways from this, and I am definitely one among them who is going to look at this, unconscious bias or the inherent bias in a different perspective, in the coming days that has come. As said by my chairperson, special thanks to Ms. Saraswati for setting the tone for the discussion, Ms. Madhu for introducing the panelists who took the first step by, by breaking the bias by introducing the male member first. We are not, as female WBC, we don't, have this bias. Ms. Bhavani, while steering the discussion with the panelists, she also shared her varied experiences, which was very enlightening to all. And a special thanks to MCCA and its team, especially Ms. Saraswati, Ms. Madhu, Ms. Swarna, who has been working tirelessly to make this session a great success. I'm reserving the special thank you note for all the 100 and odd participants who have been with us through this entire session of 1.5 hours, listening to this. We had an absolute pleasure having you all. And a special thanks to all the corporate members, who have started the first step by encouraging their employees to participate in this program, large members. Mr. Kannan, you mentioned about best practices by some corporate and he named Saint Gobain. In fact, there's a substantial number of participation from Saint Gobain today. And that sends a very, very strong message to all its employees about how the company itself is looking at, breaking this bias barrier. So thank you all once again for participating in large numbers and, wishing you all a very, very happy weekend. This is without a lockdown. So please be responsible, vaccinate yourself, practice social distancing and stay safe. Have a very good evening.
Thank you very much. Just stay back. I would request my colleagues who are working from behind the screens, if possible, to come to the screen, on the screen, please. Just a quick photograph with all your video on. Madhu, would it be possible for you to do that?
Can do a gallery view.
Yeah, we can do a gallery view. And
Dr. Sujata says, please arrange periodic sessions.
Definitely, yes. That's our idea too. Who is going to take the photograph, by the way?
I've asked them to take.
Well, someone. We really have to learn the technology, whether we can do it ourselves, being on the screen. Screenshot.
One in my phone. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. Tell us at least when the photograph is taken. How long it should be there.
Thank you.
The gallery
Yes,
view?
ma'am, done.
Oh, thank you, Jaya. Big thanks to you. Why are you not coming on the screen?
Yeah, sorry, Jay, I missed you.
No problem, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you.
pleasant evening.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gayatri. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very pleasure, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good weekend.
Stay
Bye-bye.
safe. Stay safe. Thank you.
Madam இல்ல. சரி, live